The dust rose in great ochre clouds as the lone rider crested the hill, his silhouette dark against the burning western sky. The town of Dry Creek lay before him like a scatter of wooden dice thrown carelessly across the desert floor. It was late summer of 1873, and the heat shimmered off the packed earth streets, creating mirages that danced and wavered in the distance. Ethan McKenna pulled his hat lower against the sun and guided his mare down the slope. 3 months he'd been on the trail, moving cattle from Texas to Kansas, and now he sought only a hot meal, a cold drink, and perhaps a few days' rest before heading back south. His clothes were stiff with trail dust, his face weathered by wind and sun until it resembled the leather of his saddle. The mare's hooves kicked up small puffs of dust as they entered Main Street. Dry Creek wasn't much to look at, a collection of false-fronted buildings huddled together as if seeking protection from the vast emptiness that surrounded them. The Lucky Dollar Saloon dominated one side of the street, its bat-wing doors swinging lazily in the hot breeze. Across from it stood Garrison's general store, the church with its modest steeple, and a handful of other establishments that served the scattered ranches and farms of the territory. Ethan tied his horse to the hitching post outside the saloon and pushed through the doors. The interior was dim and smoky, a blessed relief from the glare outside. Men sat hunched over tables, nursing whiskeys and beers, their conversations a low rumble, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or the slap of cards on wood. "Stranger," the bartender called out. A greeting and a question rolled into one. "Whiskey," Ethan replied, settling himself at the bar. "And information about a lodging, if you've got it." The bartender, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, poured amber liquid into a glass. "Sam Morrison's got rooms above the store. Clean sheets, fair price." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Though if I were you, I'd be angling for an invitation to the Whelan place. Best food in 3 counties, and the prettiest sight this side of the Mississippi." A man at a nearby table snorted. "Pretty sight indeed. Clara Whelan could make a preacher forget his vows." Now, another chimed in. "Let's not forget there's 2 Whelan sisters, though I suppose nobody counts the widow anymore." The bartender shook his head. "Shame about Abigail. Used to be quite the beauty herself before life got hold of her. Now she's just another burden on old man Whelan's shoulders." Ethan sipped his whiskey, letting the burn chase away the trail dust in his throat. He'd learned long ago that listening often told you more than asking. "Burden's right," the first man continued. What cowboy in his right mind would saddle himself with a widow and another man's child? Clara, now, she's fresh as morning dew. No complications. "Speaking of which," the bartender said, eyeing Ethan with renewed interest, "you wouldn't be looking for work, would you? Tom Whelan's always needing good hands, and he'd be mighty grateful to any man who took a shine to Clara. Been trying to marry her off for 2 years now." "Might be I'm looking for work," Ethan allowed. "Depends on the terms." The bartender grinned. "Terms are good at the Whelan spread, and who knows? Play your cards right. You might end up with more than wages." He winked broadly. "There's a social at the church come Saturday. Good chance to meet the local families." As if summoned by the conversation, the saloon doors swung open and a young woman entered. The room fell silent. She was indeed pretty, golden hair pinned up in elaborate curls, a dress of pale blue that highlighted her slim figure, cheeks pink with health and youth. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being watched. "Mr. Garrison," she called to a man near the door. "Mama's wondering about the fabric she ordered. Tell her it'll be here Tuesday. Miss Clara." The shopkeeper replied, practically bowing. Her gaze swept the room and landed on Ethan. For a moment, their eyes met. Hers were blue as cornflowers, bright with curiosity. She gave him a small smile, the kind that had probably broken a dozen hearts, before turning and leaving in a rustle of petticoats. "That's Clara Whelan," the bartender said unnecessarily. "Like I said, prettiest sight in the territory." But Ethan had noticed something else. A figure had been waiting outside, visible through the window. Another woman, older, dressed in faded black, She'd kept her head down, her face hidden by a worn bonnet. But there'd been something in her posture, a rigid dignity despite her shabby clothes, that caught his attention. When Clara emerged, this woman fell into step behind her, and Ethan glimpsed her face in profile, strong features marked by hardship. But there was something else there too, a kind of fierce grace that the harsh life hadn't quite managed to extinguish. "The widow," someone muttered, following his gaze. "Abigail follows Clara around like a shadow when they come to town. Protective, I suppose, though what Clara needs protecting from in Dry Creek, I couldn't say. Maybe she's protecting Clara from cowboys like him," another man joked, jerking his thumb at Ethan. The room erupted in laughter. Ethan finished his whiskey and stood. "Where might I find this Tom Whelan if I'm interested in that work?" 3 miles north. Follow the creek until you see the cottonwoods. Big white house. Can't miss it, miss." The bartender refilled glasses around the bar. "You heading out there now?" "Might as well. Trail dust doesn't wash itself off. And I could use the work." He left money on the bar and stepped back into the blazing afternoon. His mare whickered a greeting, and he took a moment to water her at the trough before mounting up. As he rode north, following the directions given, his mind wandered to those 2 women, one golden and pampered, the other worn and weathered. The pretty sister and the widow no cowboy wanted. The Whelan ranch materialized out of the heat haze like something from a dream. Cottonwoods provided blessed shade, their leaves whispering secrets in the hot wind. The house was indeed big and white, with a wraparound porch and real glass windows that caught the sunlight. Compared to the sodden dugouts and rough cabins that dotted most of the territory, it was practically a mansion. Tom Whelan himself came out to greet him, a big man with graying hair and the prosperous belly of someone who hadn't missed many meals. His handshake was firm, his manner businesslike but friendly. "Always looking for good hands," he said after Ethan had introduced himself and stated his business. "You come with references. Just finished a drive to Abilene. Trail boss was Jim Crawford out of San Antonio. He'll vouch for me if you send word." Whelan nodded approvingly. "Crawford's a good man. All right, you're hired. $1 a day and found. Bunkhouse is behind the barn. Supper's at sundown." He paused, then added with studied casualness, "We take our meals in the main house. My wife insists on it. Says it keeps the hands civilized." As if on cue, the front door opened and Clara appeared. "Papa, Mama wants to know—" "Oh." She stopped, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture that seemed practiced. "I didn't realize we had company." "This is Ethan McKenna, our new hand," Whelan said. "McKenna, my daughter Clara. Miss Whelan." Ethan touched his hat brim. "Mr. McKenna." She replied, dropping a small curtsy. "How nice to have new faces around. Will you be staying long?" "That depends on your father, miss." She smiled that same bright smile from the saloon. "Well, I do hope you'll be joining us for supper. Mama always makes extra for Saturday nights." "Clara," a voice called from inside the house. "Stop dawdling and come help with the preserves." Clara's pretty face showed a flash of irritation before smoothing back into pleasant lines. "Coming. Abigail," she called back, then to Ethan. "My sister. She's quite the taskmaster." She said it lightly, but there was an edge underneath. After she'd gone inside, Whelan walked Ethan to the bunkhouse. "That's my youngest," he said with obvious pride. "Light of my life. That girl, her sister Abigail, lives with us too. Lost her husband 2 years back. Fever took him. Left her with a boy to raise." He shook his head. "Hard thing for a woman, being widowed so young. She's a help to her mother, though good with her hands. Keeps the house running smooth." The bunkhouse was clean and spare, empty at the moment with the other hands out working. Ethan chose a bunk near the window and stowed his few possessions. "One more thing," Whelan said from the doorway. "That social at the church Saturday, you'd be welcome to come. Good way to meet folks and—" He cleared his throat. "Well, Clara does enjoy dancing." The meaning was clear as creek water. Ethan nodded noncommittally. "I'll keep it in mind. Mr. Whelan." Alone. He sat on his bunk and pulled off his boots. Through the window, he could see the back of the main house. A woman was hanging laundry, her movements quick and efficient. She had her sleeves rolled up, revealing arms tanned and strong from work. A small boy, maybe 6 years old, played near her feet, pushing a carved wooden horse through the dust. It was the widow, Abigail. Without the concealing bonnet, he could see her face clearly. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, not like her sister, but there was something compelling about her features. High cheekbones, a firm jaw, eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience far beyond her years. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, but a few strands had escaped to curl around her face in the heat. As he watched, she paused in her work to bend down and adjust the boy's collar, her face softening with a mother's tenderness. The child said something that made her laugh, a surprised sound, as if she'd forgotten she could. Then, as if sensing observation, she looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then color rose in her cheeks and she turned away, gathering the empty basket and hurrying inside, the boy trailing after her. Ethan lay back on his bunk, hands behind his head. He'd come to Dry Creek seeking only rest and wages, but something told him he'd found something else entirely. What that something was, only time would tell. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Soon it would be supper time. He'd sit at Tom Whelan's table, make polite conversation with pretty Clara, and try not to stare at the widow with the haunted eyes and work-worn hands. The dining room of the Whelan house spoke of prosperity carefully maintained. The table was solid oak, polished to a warm glow, set with china that had survived the journey west without a single chip. Oil lamps cast golden pools of light, and the smell of roasted beef filled the air. Ethan entered with the other hands. 3 men who'd greeted him with the careful reserve cowboys showed newcomers. He'd washed and changed into his cleanest shirt, though he still felt trail rough compared to the civilized setting. "Mr. McKenna," Clara's voice rang out bright as a bell. "Do sit here." She patted the chair beside her, smiling that practiced smile. Tom Whelan sat at the head of the table, his wife Martha at the foot, a thin, nervous woman who fluttered her hands when she spoke. The other hands took their usual places, leaving Ethan no choice but to accept Clara's invitation. As he sat, he noticed Abigail entering from the kitchen, carrying a platter of biscuits. She'd changed from her work dress into something equally plain but clean, her hair still pulled back severely. She moved quietly, setting the platter on the table without meeting anyone's eyes. "Abigail, dear," Martha Whelan said, "do sit down. Everything looks wonderful." The widow took a seat across from Ethan, next to her son, the boy, Samuel. Ethan watched everything with the bright curiosity of childhood, his dark hair sticking up despite what had clearly been recent attempts to smooth it down. "Mr. McKenna has just come from a cattle drive," Clara announced to the table at large. "How exciting that must have been. Tell us, was it terribly dangerous?" Ethan carved his beef, aware of being the center of attention. "No more dangerous than any other work out here, Miss. Weather and rivers cause more trouble than anything else." "Oh, but surely there were Indians? Bandits?" Clara's eyes were wide with manufactured fascination. "Clara," Abigail's voice was quiet but firm. "Mr. McKenna is trying to eat his supper." Clara's pretty face showed a flash of something less pretty. "I'm merely making conversation. Abigail, something you might try occasionally." An uncomfortable silence fell. Ethan noticed how Abigail's hand stilled on her fork, knuckles whitening slightly. But when she spoke, her voice remained level. "You're right, of course. Forgive me. Mr. McKenna, how did you find the trail conditions this year?" It was a practical question, the kind ranchers actually cared about. Ethan found himself responding more naturally, discussing water sources and grass conditions. Tom Whelan joined in, and soon the men were deep in conversation about cattle prices and railroad expansion. Through it all, Ethan remained acutely aware of the woman across from him. She ate sparingly, often pausing to cut her son's meat or wipe his chin. Her movements were economical, graceful in their efficiency. When she reached for the salt, he noticed her hands, not soft and white like Clara's, but capable hands that knew work. There was a small scar on her left thumb, white against her sun-touched skin. "Mama," Samuel piped up suddenly, "can I show Mr. McKenna my horse after supper?" "I'm sure Mr. McKenna has better things to do than look at toys," Clara interjected before Abigail could respond. "I'd be happy to see it," Ethan said, catching the boy's disappointed look. "I'm partial to horses myself." Samuel beamed, and Ethan caught a fleeting expression on Abigail's face, surprise mixed with something that might have been gratitude. The meal continued, Clara monopolizing the conversation with tales of church socials and visiting neighbors. She was charming in the way a music box was charming, pretty and predictable, each gesture and laugh perfectly timed. But Ethan found his attention wandering to quieter observations, the way Abigail's eyes softened when she looked at her son, the competent way she directed the serving without seeming to, the slight tension in her shoulders as if she were constantly braced for something. "Will you be attending the social on Saturday, Mr. McKenna?" Clara asked as dessert apple pie that melted on the tongue was served. "I haven't decided yet, Miss." "Oh, but you must!" She leaned forward, allowing him a calculated glimpse of her neckline. "Everyone will be dying to meet you. We get so few new faces in Dry Creek." "Leave the man be, Clara," Tom Whelan said with fond exasperation. "He's only just arrived. I'm merely being welcoming, Papa." She turned back to Ethan. "I do hope you'll come. I promise to save you a dance." Across the table, Abigail rose abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to check on the coffee." She disappeared into the kitchen, and Ethan noticed Clara's small smile of satisfaction. The dynamic between the sisters was becoming clearer. Clara, the pampered pet. Abigail, the useful drudge. It was a common enough arrangement in families where one daughter was pretty and one was not considered marriageable. When Abigail returned with the coffee, her face was composed, but there was a tightness around her eyes. She poured with steady hands, serving everyone before resuming her seat. "Delicious as always, Abigail." One of the ranch hands, Bill something, commented, "You sure can cook." "Thank you," she murmured, but Ethan caught the pleased flush that rose in her cheeks at the simple compliment. "Yes, Abigail is quite accomplished in the domestic arts," Clara said sweetly. "So fortunate. Really, what would a widow do without such skills?" The cruelty was subtle but unmistakable. Ethan saw Abigail's jaw tighten, saw young Samuel look between his mother and aunt with confusion. The boy might not understand the words, but children were quick to sense emotional currents. "In my experience," Ethan said conversationally, "the most valuable people are those who know how to work. Pretty is pleasant, but competence keeps you alive out here." The table fell silent. Clara's cheeks flushed pink, while Tom Whelan cleared his throat uncomfortably. But Ethan noticed the corner of Abigail's mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. After supper, the men retired to the porch for tobacco while the women cleared. Samuel tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "You still want to see my horse, mister?" "Samuel." Abigail appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand. "Don't bother, Mr. McKenna." "It's no bother," Ethan assured her. He stood, looking down at her from his considerable height. "That was a fine meal. Mrs. He realized he didn't know her married name. "Carson," she supplied quietly. "Abigail Carson, and thank you." For a moment they stood there, caught in each other's gaze. Her eyes, he noticed, were not brown as he'd thought, but a deep hazel with flecks of green. There was something in them, a mixture of wariness and wounded pride that spoke of hard lessons learned. "My horse," Samuel reminded them impatiently. The moment broke. Abigail stepped aside, and Ethan followed the boy to a corner of the porch where his carved toy waited. It was a good piece of work, detailed despite its small size. "Who made this for you?" Ethan asked, examining it. "Mama did," Samuel said proudly. "She can make anything. She made me soldiers too, but Clara said soldiers aren't appropriate." He sounded out the big word carefully. "Your mama's talented," Ethan said, meaning it. The carving showed real skill. She used to make pretty things. Samuel confided, "Before Papa went to heaven. Now she mostly makes useful things." Ethan heard the echo of adult conversations in those words, probably overheard and imperfectly understood. He handed the horse back to the boy. "Useful things are important too, I guess." Samuel looked up at him with eyes that were mirrors of his mother's. "Are you going to marry Aunt Clara?" The question startled a laugh out of Ethan. "What makes you ask that?" "Everybody marries Aunt Clara." "Well, tries to. Mama says she's particular." Another carefully pronounced word. "Are you gonna try?" "Samuel." Abigail appeared around the corner, mortification written on her face. "What have I told you about asking personal questions?" "But Mama, I just wanted to know." "Inside, young man. Time to wash up for bed." Samuel's shoulders drooped, but he obeyed. Abigail watched him go, then turned to Ethan. "I apologize for my son. He doesn't understand." She trailed off, gesturing helplessly. "Nothing to apologize for. He's a fine boy. Bright. Too bright sometimes," she murmured. Then, more formally, "Thank you for being kind to him. Not everyone is." The words held weight. Speaking of slights and snubs her son had endured, Ethan felt a surge of anger at anyone who would be unkind to a child. "He's lucky to have you," he said simply. She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, for some of the tension left her shoulders. "I should go. He truly does need to prepare for bed." She hesitated, then added, "Welcome to the Whelan Ranch, Mr. McKenna. I hope you'll be happy here." She was gone before he could respond, her dark skirts disappearing into the house. Ethan stood alone on the porch, the carved horse forgotten in his hand, wondering why her simple welcome meant more to him than all of Clara's calculated charms. From inside came the sound of voices, Clara's petulant tones and her father's placating responses. On the other side of the house, he could hear Abigail's quieter voice, singing what sounded like a lullaby. The contrast was stark, and Ethan found himself drawn to the gentler sound. He placed the toy horse carefully on the porch rail where Samuel would find it in the morning, then headed to the bunkhouse, behind him. Lamplight glowed warm in the windows, and somewhere a nightbird called across the darkening sky. He'd been in Dry Creek less than a day, but already he sensed the undercurrents that ran beneath its placid surface. In the bunkhouse, the other hands were settling in for the night. "So," Bill asked with a knowing grin, "Clara stake her claim yet?" "She's a forward little thing," another added, "but pretty enough to get away with it. Pretty enough to get a man legs shackled before he knows what hit him." The third muttered. Ethan sat on his bunk, pulling off his boots. "What about the other sister, the widow?" The men exchanged glances. "Abigail? She keeps to herself mostly. Works hard, doesn't complain. Tom Whelan took her in when her husband died, but—" Bill shrugged. "Well, you've seen how it is. Clara's the princess, Abigail's the servant. That's just how things are. Shame, really," the older hand said. "She was something before Carson died. Had a little place of their own. Was making a go of it. Then the fever came through and—" He made a helpless gesture. "No family of her own? None that would claim her. Carson was a drifter who stayed put for a while. Good man, worked hard, but no connections. When he died, she had nothing but the boy and the clothes on her back." Ethan lay back, staring at the rough ceiling. He thought of Abigail's work-worn hands, the pride in her bearing despite her reduced circumstances, the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at her son, and he thought of Clara, pretty as a picture and just as flat, with her calculated smiles and casual cruelties. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind whispered secrets through the cottonwoods. Tomorrow would bring work and sweat and the endless rhythms of ranch life. But tonight, Ethan found himself thinking of hazel eyes and a quiet voice singing lullabies in the darkness. The dust storm rolled across the prairie like a living thing, a wall of brown fury that blotted out the sun. Ethan had seen it coming from miles away, the ominous cloud building on the horizon while he helped repair fence lines on the Whelan property's eastern boundary. "Storm coming in fast," Bill shouted over the rising wind. "We best get back." The ranch hands spurred their horses toward home, but the storm moved faster. Within minutes, the world disappeared into a howling chaos of dirt and debris. Ethan pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth, squinting through the assault of grit and sand. Through the brown haze, he could make out the ranch buildings. Most of the household would be battened down by now, but movement near the smaller cabin caught his eye. A figure struggled with a flapping door. Abigail, trying to secure her and Samuel's quarters against the storm. Without thinking, Ethan veered his horse toward her. She was fighting to hold the door while simultaneously trying to nail a loose board across the window. The wind whipped her skirts and tore at her hair, which had come loose from its usual severe style. "Get inside," he shouted, jumping from his horse. She shook her head stubbornly, still wrestling with the board. "The window will break! Samuel!" Ethan took the hammer from her hands. "Inside, now!" For once, she didn't argue. As she ducked through the doorway, Ethan caught a glimpse of Samuel's frightened face peering out. Working quickly, he secured the board across the window, then added his weight to hers against the door as they forced it shut and dropped the bar into place. The relative quiet inside was shocking after the roar of the storm. They stood catching their breath, both covered in dust. Abigail's hair fell around her shoulders in tangled waves, and there were tracks on her cheeks where tears from the stinging sand had run. "Mama?" Samuel's voice was small. "It's all right, sweetheart," Abigail said, moving to comfort her son. "Just a dust storm. We're safe inside." Ethan became aware that he was intruding on their private space. The cabin was small but scrupulously clean, with touches that spoke of a woman trying to make a home from very little. Curtains sewn from flour sacks hung at the windows, and a rag rug brightened the floor. A narrow bed occupied one corner, with a smaller pallet for Samuel nearby. "Thank you," Abigail said quietly. "I couldn't have managed that alone." "You were doing pretty well," Ethan observed. "Most women would have run for shelter. Most women don't have a leaking roof and a son afraid of storms." She moved to the table where a basin of water sat, wringing out a cloth. "Here, you're covered in dust." He accepted the cloth gratefully, wiping his face and hands. Outside, the storm continued its assault, rattling the boards he just nailed into place. "Is it going to blow us away?" Samuel asked, pressing close to his mother. "No, baby, the cabin is strong. Remember how we talked about this? The storms come, but they always pass." Ethan watched her gentle handling of the boy's fear, the way she made him feel safe despite her own obvious concern about the damage the storm might cause. There was a leak already starting in one corner, and she quickly placed a pot beneath it. "I could fix that," he offered. "When the storm passes." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. "That's kind of you, but I couldn't impose. You have your regular work." "It's no imposition." They stood there, awkwardly aware of the forced intimacy of the situation. The storm had created a strange bubble of isolation, cutting them off from the rest of the ranch. "Would you like some coffee?" Abigail asked finally. "I have some on the stove." He accepted, settling carefully onto one of the two chairs at the small table. Samuel, his fear easing as the storm showed no signs of breaching their shelter, brought his carved horse to show Ethan again. "Mama's teaching me letters," the boy announced. "Want a seat?" "Samuel, I'm sure Mr. McKenna." "I'd like to see," Ethan interrupted gently. Samuel fetched a slate and carefully wrote his name in uneven letters. The pride on his face was matched by the quiet glow in his mother's eyes. "That's fine work," Ethan said seriously. "Better than mine was at your age." "Mama says learning is important," Samuel informed him. "Even if we don't have much else, we have our minds." Ethan glanced at Abigail, who was busying herself with the coffee to hide her embarrassment. He understood now why she worked so hard, why she endured Clara's small cruelties without complaint. Everything was for this boy, to give him a chance at something better. "Your mama's right," he said. "Man who can read and write can go anywhere, be anything." They sat quietly as the storm raged outside. Abigail served coffee in cups that didn't match but were clean and unchipped. The conversation meandered. Samuel's lessons. The challenges of ranch life. Carefully avoiding anything too personal. But underneath the casual talk, Ethan sensed deeper currents. "How long have you been widowed?" he asked during a lull, then immediately regretted the personal question. 2 years, she answered simply. Samuel was 4 when his father died. "I'm sorry," she shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize the loss. "James was a good man. We had 3 years together. That's more than some get." "You loved him." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she met his eyes directly. "Does that surprise you, that a plain woman could love and be loved in return?" "You're not plain," he said without thinking, then felt heat rise in his face at the bold statement. She stared at him, color blooming in her cheeks. For a moment, something electric passed between them, as tangible as the lightning that occasionally lit up the storm outside. "I should check the other window," she said abruptly, rising from the table. The spell broke. Ethan helped her secure a rattling shutter, careful to maintain proper distance. Samuel had curled up on his pallet, the excitement and fear of the storm having worn him out. "He's a good boy," Ethan observed quietly. "He's everything," Abigail said simply. "Everything I do is for him." "Must be hard, depending on your father's charity." Her jaw tightened. "Tom Whelan is a good man. He didn't have to take us in. And I work for our keep cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm not a charity case. Mr. McKenna, I didn't mean—" "I know what people say," she continued, her voice low but fierce. "Poor Abigail. The widow no cowboy wants, lucky to have a roof over her head, even if she's treated like a servant in what used to be her childhood home." The bitterness in her voice revealed depths of hurt usually kept hidden. Ethan wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but knew it would be inappropriate. "You deserve better," he said instead. She laughed, a sound without humor. "Deserve? Life doesn't care what we deserve, Mr. McKenna. It gives us what it will, and we make the best of it." Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the howling wind dropping to a sullen moan. Soon it would be safe to leave, to return to the proper boundaries of their separate lives. "I should go," Ethan said reluctantly. "They'll be wondering where I am." Abigail nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you for your help." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I meant what I said about fixing that roof. I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right." "You don't have to." "I want to." She looked up at him then, searching his face for mockery or pity, finding neither. She nodded slowly. "All right, thank you." Ethan stepped out into the settling dust. The air was still thick with grit, but the worst had passed. As he made his way back to the main house, he saw figures emerging from shelter. Clara stood on the porch, her dress still pristine, calling out dramatically about the terrible storm. "Oh, Mr. McKenna!" she cried, spotting him. "We were so worried. Where on earth have you been?" "Helping secure loose shutters," he said vaguely. "How heroic." She clasped her hands together. "You must come in and let me fix you something. You look absolutely savage." He made his excuses and headed for the bunkhouse instead. Behind him, he heard Clara's voice, petulant now, complaining to her father about something. Through the settling dust, he could see Abigail's cabin, small and weathered but standing firm against the storm. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the other hands snore, Ethan thought about what he'd learned, about a woman who carved toys for her son and taught him letters by lamplight, about pride that endured despite circumstances, and love that put a child's needs above everything else, about eyes that held depths of pain but hadn't lost their capacity for warmth. Tom Whelan wanted him to court Clara. That was clear. It would be the smart move. Marry the pretty daughter, inherit a piece of the ranch, live a comfortable life. Clara herself expected it, was already laying her snares with practiced skill. But Ethan had never been one for the easy path. And something about Abigail Carson, her strength, her dignity, her fierce devotion to her son, called to something deep within him. She was like this land itself, harsh and demanding on the surface, but possessing a terrible beauty for those with eyes to see it. Tomorrow he would fix her roof. It was a small thing, but maybe that's how the best things started, with small kindnesses in the midst of storms. And maybe, just maybe, he could show her that not all cowboys were fools who valued pretty faces over true worth. The wind had died to a whisper now, and somewhere a nighthawk called across the empty plains. Ethan closed his eyes and dreamed of hazel eyes and work-worn hands, and a woman who stood against storms with nothing but determination and love. The church social was in full swing when Ethan arrived, the small building blazing with lamplight and buzzing with conversation. He'd cleaned up as best he could, though his one good shirt seemed plain compared to the finery on display. Dry Creek's entire population had turned out, eager for any excuse to gather and gossip. "Mr. McKenna!" Clara's voice carried across the room. She glided toward him in a dress of buttercup yellow, every ribbon and ruffle perfectly placed. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming. Miss Whelan." He touched his hat brim politely. "Oh, we must have that dance you promised." She slipped her arm through his before he could respond, leading him toward the cleared area where couples were already moving to the fiddle music. Ethan allowed himself to be pulled along, aware of the approving looks from Tom Whelan and the other town elders. This was what they expected, what made sense in their ordered world. The pretty daughter and the new cowboy, a story as old as the frontier itself. As they danced, Clara kept up a steady stream of chatter about neighbors and weather and her plans for new curtains. Ethan responded appropriately, but his attention kept drifting to the edges of the room where Abigail stood with the other widows and spinsters, keeping watch over the children. She wore a dress of dark blue, not black. He noticed with interest. It was plain, but well-fitted, showing the curves her usual shapeless clothing hid. Her hair was arranged more softly than usual, though still modest compared to Clara's elaborate curls. When she bent to wipe a child's face or adjust Samuel's collar, Ethan caught himself watching the graceful line of her neck. "You're not listening to me," Clara said petulantly, tightening her grip on his arm. "My apologies. Miss, the heat makes it hard to concentrate." She simpered, taking this as a compliment to her beauty's distracting power. "Perhaps we should step outside for some air." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. Mrs. Morrison, the bank manager's wife, stood glaring at Abigail with undisguised contempt. "I specifically said the lemonade should be served in the crystal bowl." "Mrs." Morrison's voice carried clearly. "This earthenware thing is completely unsuitable." "I'm sorry," Abigail said quietly, "but the crystal bowl was cracked. I thought—" "You thought?" "Mrs." Morrison's laugh was sharp. "That's the problem, isn't it? You forget your place. Just because you were raised here doesn't mean you're still one of us. You're a servant now, and servants don't think. They obey." The room had gone quiet, everyone pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. Ethan saw Abigail's face flush, saw her hands tremble as she began transferring lemonade to another bowl. "How dare you?" Clara said suddenly, her voice ringing with false sympathy. "How dare you speak to my dear sister that way?" She swept across the room, placing herself between Abigail and Mrs. Morrison. "Abigail is family. She may have fallen in circumstances, but she's still a Whelan." It should have been a defense, but something in Clara's tone made it worse. The emphasis on fallen, the pause before circumstances, the way she managed to highlight Abigail's reduced status while appearing to defend her. "Of course, dear." "Mrs." Morrison said, understanding the game. "I simply thought, for her own good, she should remember. Well, We all know how hard it must be, depending on charity. Indeed, Clara agreed sweetly. Poor Abigail. But what can she do? It's not as if any man would— That is, with a child and no prospects. She trailed off delicately, letting the implications hang. Ethan had heard enough. He crossed the room in long strides, ignoring Clara's startled protest. "Mrs. Carson," he said formally, "might I have this dance?" The room collectively held its breath. Abigail stared at him, eyes wide with shock. I don't— "Please," he said quietly, extending his hand. She looked at his hand, then at the watching crowd, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, a squaring of shoulders, a lifting of chin. She placed her hand in his. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." He led her to the dance floor, acutely aware of the whispers erupting behind them. Clara's face had gone from yellow dress to red face in seconds, while Tom Whelan looked thunderous. "You don't have to do this," Abigail whispered as they began to move to the music. "I know Clara has nothing to do with this," Ethan said firmly. "I asked you to dance because I wanted to." She stumbled slightly, and he steadied her. "But why? You could have any girl here. Clara is beautiful, young, comes with a ranch, and you're worth 10 of her," he said bluntly. Abigail's breath caught. They moved in silence for a moment, finding their rhythm. She danced well, better than Clara with all her practiced graces. There was something natural about the way she moved, as if her body remembered happier times. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them. You don't understand." Her voice was urgent now. "This will have consequences. Tom Whelan won't forgive this insult to Clara. You could lose your position. Then I'll find another." "Why?" She looked up at him, those hazel eyes searching his face. "Why would you risk anything for me? I'm nothing special, a widow with a child, past my prime, working as a servant in my own family's home." "Stop," Ethan commanded quietly. "Stop repeating their words." She fell silent, but he could feel the tension in her body, see the glimmer of tears she was fighting back. "You want to know why?" he continued. "Because I've watched you. I've seen how you care for that boy, how you work without complaint, how you hold your head up no matter what they throw at you. I've seen you fix what's broken and make beauty from nothing. You carved that horse for Samuel with your own hands. You teach him his letters by lamplight after working all day. You faced down that storm to protect what little you have. That's just survival." She protested weakly. "No," he said. "That's strength. That's love. That's everything that matters out here." He spun her gently, bringing her closer. "Clara's beautiful. Yes, like a china doll is beautiful, pretty to look at, useless for anything else. But you're like this land. You endure. You grow things in impossible soil. You're real." The music ended, but for a moment they stood frozen, his hand still at her waist, hers on his shoulder. Around them, the social continued, but in their small circle, time had stopped. "Mr. McKenna." Tom Whelan's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "A word, if you please." Ethan released Abigail slowly, deliberately. "Save me another dance," he told her, loud enough for others to hear. He followed Whelan outside, where the older man rounded on him immediately. "What the hell do you think you're playing at?" "I'm not playing at anything, sir. You humiliated my daughter in front of the entire town. I asked a woman to dance. If that humiliates Clara, perhaps she should examine why." Whelan's face darkened. "Don't get clever with me. Boy, I hired you to work cattle, not to upset the natural order of things. Clara had expectations. Based on what? I never gave her any encouragement. You didn't have to. Any man with sense would jump at the chance to marry her. She's beautiful, accomplished, spoiled and cruel." Ethan interrupted. "I heard what she said in there, defending her sister by reminding everyone of her reduced circumstances. That's not kindness. Mr. Whelan, that's cruelty dressed up in silk." "How dare you!" I dare because it's true, and you know it. You've let Clara become a petty tyrant while Abigail works herself to the bone for the roof over her head. Ethan took a breath, controlling his temper. I'll work out the week, give you time to find a replacement, but I won't court your daughter. Not now, not ever. Whelan stared at him, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. It's Abigail, isn't it? You've got notions about her. My notions are my own business. She's used goods. Boy. Another man's leavings with another man's brat to raise. You could have Clara, have part of this ranch. Keep your ranch, Ethan said quietly. And if you speak of Abigail that way again, we'll have more than words between us. He turned and walked back into the social, leaving Whelan sputtering behind him. The crowd parted as he entered, conversation stopping mid-sentence. He found Abigail where he'd left her, Samuel clinging to her skirts. Would you like me to see you home, Mrs. Carson? She looked around at the hostile faces, at Clara's tearful fury, at the townsfolk ready to pounce on this juicy scandal. Then she looked at him, and something blazed in her eyes. Defiance, perhaps, or simply exhaustion with pretense. Yes, she said clearly. Thank you, Mr. McKenna. That would be kind. She collected Samuel and their few belongings while Ethan waited, ignoring the whispers that rose like buzzing insects. When she was ready, he offered his arm formally, as if she were a lady of quality instead of a widow in a mended dress. They walked out together, leaving the social in uproar behind them. The night was clear. Stars scattered like spilled salt across the black sky. Samuel walked between them, chattering about the treats he'd eaten, blissfully unaware of the drama. You realize what you've done, Abigail said quietly once the boy had run ahead. Tom will make you leave. Clara will make sure no one in town hires you. You'll have to move on. Maybe, Ethan agreed. Question is, would you come with me? She stopped walking so abruptly he nearly stumbled. What? I'm not a man for games or long courtships, he said. I know what I want. I want you. You and Samuel. A real family, built on respect and partnership, not pretty faces and ranch deeds. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're strong and kind and brave. I know you love that boy more than life. I know you deserve better than scraps from your sister's table. He touched her face gently. I know you make me want to be a better man than I am. Ethan, she breathed, using his given name for the first time. I'm scared. Of what? Of hoping, of believing this is real. Of waking up and finding it's all been a dream. Her voice broke. I can't afford dreams anymore. This isn't a dream, he said firmly. This is a choice. My choice. The cowboy rejected the beautiful sister and chose the widow no cowboy wanted, except I do want you, Abigail, more than I've ever wanted anything. She was crying now, tears sliding silently down her cheeks in the starlight. They'll never forgive this, either of us. Then we'll make our own way, build our own life. He wiped her tears with his thumb. What do you say? Before she could answer, Samuel came running back. Mama, are you sad? No, baby, she said, kneeling to hug him. Not sad, just overwhelmed. The boy looked at Ethan suspiciously. Did you make my mama cry? I hope not, Ethan said seriously. I'm trying to make her happy. Think you could help me with that? Samuel considered this. Are you going to be my new papa? Samuel? Abigail gasped. Would that be all right with you? Ethan asked the boy. Samuel shrugged with 6-year-old practicality. I guess you're nice, and you like my horse. Ethan laughed, and after a moment, Abigail joined him. They stood there in the starlight, laughing and crying and holding on to each other, while the church social continued without them. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Anger, the need for new plans. But tonight, under the vast western sky, a cowboy and a widow and a small boy made their own small circle of light against the darkness. The attack came at the devil's hour, when the night was blackest and the town slept deepest. Ethan woke to the sound of horses, too many horses moving too fast for honest business. He rolled from his bunk, pulling on boots and grabbing his rifle in one practiced motion. "Raiders!" Bill shouted from the window. "Coming in from the north!" The bunkhouse erupted in controlled chaos as the hands armed themselves. Outside, orange flames were already licking at the Morrison Bank, and the crack of gunfire split the night. This wasn't random violence. It was organized, planned. The Garrison gang, most likely, come to clean out Dry Creek's meager wealth. "Protect the main house!" someone yelled. But Ethan's thoughts flew elsewhere. Abigail and Samuel were alone in their cabin, isolated from the other buildings. He broke from the group, running through the darkness toward their small dwelling. The raiders had thought of it too. 3 men were already there, one kicking at the door while the others stood watch. Ethan could hear Samuel's terrified cries from inside, Abigail's voice trying to calm him even as she barricaded the entrance. No time for subtlety. Ethan raised his rifle and fired, dropping the man at the door. The others spun, returning fire, and Ethan dove behind the wood pile as bullets splintered the logs around him. "Get that door open," one raider shouted. "Woman and kid might be worth something." The remaining man at the door raised his boot again, and this time the wood cracked. Ethan heard Abigail scream, not in fear, but in fury. The distinctive blast of a shotgun followed, and the raider stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Good girl, Ethan thought. But she'd have only one more shot, and there were still 2 men standing. He broke cover, firing as he ran. One raider went down, but the other got off a shot that burned across Ethan's ribs. Pain flared hot and sharp, but he kept moving, tackling the last man before he could reload. They rolled in the dirt, grappling for control of the gun. The raider was bigger, heavier, and Ethan's wound was bleeding freely now. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision as the man's hands found his throat. Then the shotgun roared again, and the pressure vanished. Ethan gasped for air, seeing Abigail standing in the doorway, the smoking gun in her hands. The raider lay still beside him. "Ethan!" She dropped the gun and ran to him, falling to her knees in the dirt. "You're hurt." "Just a graze," he managed, though the world was tilting alarmingly. "Samuel? He's safe, hidden under the bed like I taught him." Her hands were already tearing strips from her nightgown to bind his wound. "Why did you come? You should have stayed with the others." "Had to," he interrupted. "Couldn't let anything happen to you, either of you." More gunfire echoed from the town, but it was growing sporadic. The surprise was over. The town was fighting back. Soon others would come to check the outlying buildings. "Can you stand?" Abigail asked, her face pale in the moonlight. With her help, he managed to get to his feet. The world swayed but steadied. Together. They made it inside the cabin where Samuel huddled under the bed, eyes wide with terror. "It's all right, baby," Abigail coaxed. "You can come out, mister. Ethan saved us." The boy crawled out and immediately attached himself to his mother's skirts. But his eyes were on Ethan, taking in the blood, the gun, the evidence of violence. "You fought the bad men," Samuel said in a small voice. "Yes," Ethan said simply. There was no point in lying to children about the harsh realities of frontier life. "Were you scared?" Ethan knelt carefully, bringing himself to the boy's level. "Very scared, but sometimes we do scary things to protect the people we care about." Samuel nodded solemnly, then surprised them both by throwing his arms around Ethan's neck. "Thank you for protecting us," over the boy's head. Ethan met Abigail's eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. The door burst open and Tom Whelan appeared, rifle in hand. He took in the scene, the dead raiders outside, Ethan's wound, Abigail in her torn nightgown with a shotgun nearby. "Good God," he breathed. "Is everyone all right?" "Thanks to Ethan," Abigail said firmly. "He risked his life for us." Whelan's expression was complex as he looked at Ethan. "The town beat them back, lost the bank's money, but no townfolk killed. Thank the Lord. Though Johnson's boy took a bullet in the leg." He paused. "Clara's hysterical. Locked herself in her room at the first sound of gunfire. The contrast was implicit but unmistakable. One sister cowering in safety, while the other defended her child with a shotgun. "I need to check the other buildings," Whelan continued. "Can you make it to the main house?" "We'll manage," Ethan said. After Whelan left, Abigail helped Ethan to a chair and properly cleaned and dressed his wound. Her hands were gentle but efficient, and he found himself watching her face as she worked. The determined set of her jaw, the way she bit her lip in concentration. "You've done this before," he observed. "Ranch life teaches many skills," she said quietly. "James came home bloodied more than once. Bar fights, horse accidents, the usual. You must have loved him very much." She paused in her bandaging. "I did. He was a good man, kind. He saw me when others didn't." She resumed working, not meeting his eyes. "But what I feel for you, it's different, stronger, like a fire instead of a warm hearth. It frightens me." "Abigail." "No, let me finish." She tied off the bandage and finally looked at him. "When I saw those men at our door, my first thought wasn't about dying. It was that I'd never told you I love you. Never had the chance to see what we could build together." Ethan caught her hand. "Then let's build it. Tonight proved Dry Creek isn't safe. There'll be more raids, more violence. Let's leave. Head somewhere new. California, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh." "With what money?" "I have nothing. And you?" "I have enough saved for a start. And I'm not afraid of hard work." He pulled her closer. "Marry me, Abigail." "Not someday. Not after a proper courtship. Now. As soon as we can find a preacher. Your wound will heal faster with you beside me." He cupped her face in his hands. "I almost lost you tonight. I won't waste any more time." Before she could answer, voices approached outside. The door opened and half the town seemed to crowd in, neighbors checking on neighbors, the violence having stripped away. Temporarily, the usual social boundaries. "Heard you killed 3 of them single-handed," someone said to Ethan. "Abigail shot one," he corrected. "Probably saved my life." The crowd murmured, looking at the widow with new eyes. A woman who could defend her home with a shotgun was worth something out here, regardless of her circumstances. Doc Pritchard arrived to properly tend Ethan's wound, tisking over Abigail's field dressing even as he admitted it had likely saved Ethan from bleeding out. Clara appeared eventually, fully dressed and perfectly coiffed despite the hour, lamenting dramatically about her terror. "I simply couldn't bear the violence," she declared. "Such delicate nerves I have. Not like some people." Her gaze cut to Abigail. "I suppose those of lower circumstances become accustomed to such brutality." "Yes," Abigail said calmly. "We learn to survive, to protect what's ours. Not everyone has the luxury of hiding behind locked doors while others fight." The room went silent. Clara flushed an ugly red. "How dare you?" "Enough," Tom Whelan said tiredly. "We've all had enough excitement for one night." He looked at Ethan. "You saved my daughter and grandson. I won't forget that. They're not yours to save or forget," Ethan said quietly but firmly. "With respect, Mr. Whelan, Abigail's agreed to be my wife. We'll be leaving Dry Creek as soon as I can travel." The announcement caused another stir. Clara went white, then red, then white again. "This is ridiculous. You can't marry her. She's nothing. A servant. "The woman I love," Ethan finished. "The bravest woman I know. The woman who stood ready to die protecting her son while you hid in your room." Clara fled in tears. Tom Whelan stood silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I suppose I saw this coming," he said. "Very well, Abigail. You're free to go with my blessing. It's more than past time." He looked older suddenly, worn. "I let Clara become what she is. Let my wife convince me that pretty meant valuable. Maybe if I'd raised them both the same." He trailed off and left. The crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with gossip that would keep the town talking for months. Soon, only Doc Pritchard remained, finishing his work. You'll need at least a week before you can ride any distance, he told Ethan. That wound's deeper than it looks. After he left, the cabin fell quiet. Samuel had fallen asleep in his mother's arms, exhausted by terror and excitement. Abigail laid him gently on his bed, then returned to sit beside Ethan. "A week," she said softly. "Think the town can tolerate us that long?" "Don't care if they can't." He took her hand. "We've survived storms and social scandals and now raiders. What's a little gossip?" She laughed quietly. "When you put it that way..." She sobered. "Are you sure about this? California's a long way. You'll be starting over with a ready-made family. No guarantee of success." "I'm sure," he interrupted. "Sure as I've ever been about anything. You, me, and Samuel. We'll make our own way." Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The night's violence seemed like a bad dream, except for the bandage around Ethan's ribs and the scattered brass casings glinting in the early light. "I suppose I should start packing," Abigail said. "Not that there's much to pack. We'll get new things, build new memories." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Mrs. McKenna." She smiled, and it transformed her face, showing hints of the girl she'd been before life marked her. Not yet, but soon. They sat together, hands clasped, watching the sun rise over Dry Creek. In a week they'd leave this place behind, heading west toward new possibilities. The cowboy who rejected the beautiful sister for the widow no one wanted, riding toward a future built on love instead of convenience, strength instead of beauty, truth instead of pretty lies. The town would talk about it for years, the night of the raid, the scandal of Ethan's choice, the way Abigail Carson had stood in her doorway with a shotgun and fire in her eyes. But by then, they'd be long gone, writing their own story under California skies. The Lucky Dollar Saloon had seen its share of drama, but the sight of Ethan McKenna lying on one of its tables, blood seeping through his bandages while Abigail Carson held his hand, was something new entirely. Doc Pritchard worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound that had torn open during Ethan's defense of the widow and her son. "Damn fool thing, running around playing hero with a hole in your ribs," the doctor muttered, but his tone held grudging respect. "Had to," Ethan gritted out between clenched teeth as the whiskey-soaked cloth burned against raw flesh. "They needed me. Most men would have stayed with the main group," Pritchard observed. "Protected the important buildings, the bank, the big house where the Whelan money sits. Those weren't the important things," Ethan said simply, his eyes finding Abigail's. She hadn't left his side since they'd brought him in, despite the townspeople's whispers and stares. Her dress was still torn from making bandages, her hair fallen from its pins, and there were powder burns on her hands from firing the shotgun. She looked nothing like the proper ladies of Dry Creek, and everything like the partner Ethan wanted beside him. "Mama, is Mr. Ethan going to be all right?" Samuel's small voice piped up from where he sat in the corner, clutching his carved horse. "Yes, sweetheart," Abigail assured him, though her face was pale with worry. "Doc Pritchard is the best there is." "Don't know about that," the doctor said gruffly. "But I've patched up enough cowboys to know this one's too stubborn to die from a little bullet graze." The saloon doors swung open and Clara Whelan swept in, dressed now in an elaborate mourning costume, though no one had died. The black silk and velvet were clearly meant to emphasize her delicate sensibilities after the night's violence. "I demand to know what's happening here," she announced. "Papa says you're still planning to leave with her." She couldn't bring herself to say Abigail's name. "That's right," Ethan confirmed, not bothering to sit up despite the impropriety of addressing a lady from his back. "This is madness." Clara's carefully modulated voice rose to something approaching a shriek. "You could have had me. I was prepared to accept your suit. Despite your rough ways, I would have civilized you, made you respectable." "I don't want to be civilized," Ethan interrupted. "I want to be happy, and Abigail makes me happy." "She's used goods," Clara spat out, abandoning all pretense of refinement. "Another man's leavings. She's nothing but a servant, a burden on our family's charity." "Enough." Abigail stood slowly, and something in her bearing made Clara take a step back. "You're right. Clara, I am used goods, as you so delicately put it. I've been married. I've borne a child. I've known love and loss and hard work. My hands are rough and my face is weathered, and I'll never be pretty again." She moved closer to her sister, and the contrast between them was stark. One all silk and softness, the other steel and strength. "But I know things you don't," Abigail continued quietly. "I know how to keep a house through a hard winter on almost nothing. I know how to nurse a sick child through a fever. I know how to load a gun and defend what's mine. I know the value of a man who runs toward danger to protect others instead of away from it." "You know nothing?" Clara's perfect face was twisted with rage. "You think you've won something. You've got a saddle tramp with no prospects, and you'll spend your life in poverty, old before your time." "I'll spend my life with someone who sees my worth," Abigail said firmly. "That's more than you'll have with all your beauty and father's money." Clara raised her hand as if to slap her sister, but Tom Whelan's voice stopped her. "That's enough, Clara." He stood in the doorway, looking tired and older than his years. "Go home. Papa, you can't take her side. I said go home." His tone brooked no argument. Clara fled in a rustle of black silk and wounded pride. Whelan approached the table where Ethan lay. "How bad is it, Doc?" "He'll live," Pritchard said, tying off the last bandage. "But he needs rest. A week at least before he can ride any distance." "He can recuperate at the house," Whelan said, surprising everyone. "Tom," Abigail began, but he held up a hand. "You saved my daughter and grandson last night," he said to Ethan. "Whatever else has passed between us, I owe you that debt. You'll stay at the house until you're healed. Both of you. It's time I remembered what family really means." He looked at Abigail then, and his expression softened. "I failed you, girl. Let Martha and Clara convince me that taking you in was enough, that letting you work for your keep was generous. But your father would have horsewhipped me for how you've been treated in his house. You gave us shelter when we had nothing," Abigail said quietly. "I gave you a roof and made you a servant under it." Whelan corrected harshly. "Let my youngest daughter treat you like dirt while you raised your boy in a cabin not fit for animals. No more." He turned to the gathered townspeople, many of whom had filtered in to gawk at the drama. "Let it be known," he said loudly, "that Abigail Carson, soon to be McKenna, leaves with my blessing and a dowry befitting a daughter of the Whelan house. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me." The crowd murmured, shocked at this reversal. A few of the women who'd been kindest to Abigail over the years nodded approvingly. With help, Ethan was moved to the Whelan house, installed in the best guest room. Abigail tended him with gentle hands and worried eyes, while Samuel appointed himself guardian, sitting by the bed with his carved horse and chattering about their upcoming adventure. "Will there be bears in California?" the boy asked. "Maybe," Ethan said. "But don't worry. Your mama's proved she can handle dangerous critters." Samuel beamed. "Mama's brave. She shot the bad man." "The bravest," Ethan agreed, catching Abigail's hand as she adjusted his pillows. Over the next days, the town's attitude began to shift. The story of the raid grew in the telling, and Abigail's role in it, defending her home with a shotgun, saving Ethan's life, transformed her in people's eyes from pitied widow to frontier heroine. Women who'd barely acknowledged her before stopped by with food and good wishes. Men tipped their hats with newfound respect. Clara kept to her room, emerging only for meals where she maintained a martyred silence. But Martha Whelan, freed somehow from her younger daughter's influence, began to show glimpses of the woman she must have been before propriety and Clara's demands shaped her into nervous fluttering. "I remember when you were little," she told Abigail one evening, helping to pack what few belongings the widow owned. "You were always the serious one, even then. Always taking care of things, making sure Clara had what she needed." "Someone had to," Abigail said without bitterness. "Yes," Martha agreed sadly. "And I let it become your whole life. Let Clara's beauty blind me to your worth. I'm sorry. Abigail, more sorry than you'll ever know. The week passed slowly for Ethan, who chafed at the enforced inactivity, but it gave him time to watch Abigail in different settings, seeing her gradually relax as the household treated her as family instead of servant, watching her smile more readily, hearing her laugh at Samuel's antics without immediately stifling it. "You look younger," he told her one afternoon as she read to him from a book of poetry. She blushed. "It's just, I'd forgotten what it felt like, to be seen as a person instead of a burden." "You were never a burden," he said fiercely, just surrounded by people too blind to see treasure when it was right in front of them. On the 6th day, Doc Pritchard proclaimed him fit enough for limited activity. That evening, Ethan insisted on joining the family for dinner, though walking to the dining room left him winded. The meal was strange. Clara sullenly silent, Martha trying too hard to make up for years of neglect, Tom gruffly attempting conversation, but Samuel's cheerful chatter filled the awkward gaps, and Abigail's quiet presence beside him made everything else bearable. After dinner, Tom called Ethan into his study. "I've arranged for a wagon," the older man said without preamble. "Good sturdy one, with a team that'll get you to California. Consider it Abigail's dowry." "That's generous, but—" "It's not generous," Tom interrupted. "It's what I should have done 2 years ago when James died. Should have set her up proper instead of letting Martha convince me charity was enough." He opened a drawer, pulling out a leather pouch. This too. Not a fortune, but enough to start fresh. Edie. Ethan hefted the pouch, hearing the clink of gold coins. "This is too much." "No," Tom said firmly. "It's not nearly enough, but it's what I can do now." He turned to look out the window. "You know what the funny thing is? Clara could have had any man in the territory. Still can. Beauty like hers opens doors. But Abigail, she only had this one chance. And thank God you saw what others missed." "I didn't miss it," Ethan said. "It was right there in front of anyone with eyes to see." Tom smiled sadly. "Then I guess most of us were blind." He turned back. "Take care of them. Abigail's strong. But she's been hurt enough, and the boy needs a father. They'll want for nothing I can provide." Ethan promised. "I believe you." Tom extended his hand. "You're a good man, McKenna. Better than I gave you credit for." That night, Ethan found Abigail on the porch, looking out at the stars. She turned at his approach, concern immediately flashing across her face. "Should you be up?" "I'm fine," he assured her, settling carefully beside her on the bench. "Thinking about leaving? About everything?" She admitted, 2 weeks ago I was resigned to my life, servant in my father's house, whispered about in town, watching Samuel grow up marked by my choices. Now, she turned to him, starlight catching in her eyes. "Now I have hope again. It terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I've lost hope before, lost love, lost my place in the world." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if I lose you too?" Ethan pulled her close, ignoring the twinge in his ribs. "You won't. I'm too stubborn to die, remember, and too lucky to let you go." She leaned into him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow they would finish preparations. The next day, they'd leave Dry Creek forever. But tonight, they had this moment of peace between storms, this promise of a future neither had dared imagine. "I love you," Abigail said suddenly. "I should have said it before, when you asked me to marry you, but I was scared and overwhelmed and—" He silenced her with a kiss, gentle and promising. "I know," he said when they parted. "I've known since that first night at dinner, when you looked at Samuel like he was your whole world. I want to be part of that world. Abigail, you and Samuel and whatever children come after—" "Children," she repeated wonderingly. "I hadn't dared think." "Think," he urged. "Dream, plan. We've got the rest of our lives to make it all real." From inside came the sound of Samuel calling for his mother, probably fighting sleep as usual. Abigail rose with a smile. "The rest of our lives." she repeated. I like the sound of that. She went inside, leaving Ethan alone with the stars and his thoughts. In 2 days, they'd point their wagon west, toward California and new beginnings. The cowboy who chose the widow, the woman no one wanted, riding toward a future bright with possibility. He could hardly wait. The morning of Clara's departure dawned gray and sullen, matching the mood that had settled over the Whelan household. She stood beside the stagecoach that would take her to Denver, where a cousin had agreed to introduce her to society. Her trunks were loaded, her traveling costume impeccable, but her beautiful face was marred by bitterness. I suppose you're satisfied, she said to Abigail, who had come to see her off despite everything. You've won. There was never a competition. Clara, Abigail replied quietly. Only in your mind. Clara's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. No competition? You took everything. The man I wanted, Papa's approval, even Mother's attention. You were supposed to stay in your place, grateful for our charity. And what place was that? Abigail interrupted, her patience finally exhausted. Servant? Burden? Convenient target for your cruelty. I'm your sister, Clara. I always loved you, always tried to protect you, but you could never see past your mirror long enough to notice. For a moment, something flickered in Clara's eyes, perhaps regret, or the ghost of the sister she might have been. Then her face hardened again. Love, she scoffed. What does love matter when you're beautiful? I'll have a dozen proposals within a month in Denver. Rich men, important men, not some trail-worn cowboy with nothing to offer but calloused hands and pretty words. Ethan stepped forward, his presence solid and protective beside Abigail. Those rich men might buy you, Clara, but they'll never love you. Not the way a man loves a woman he respects. Clara's perfect composure finally cracked. How dare you? I dare because it's true, Ethan said calmly. You'll go to Denver. You'll marry well. You'll have everything money can buy. But you'll spend your life wondering why it feels so empty, why your husband looks through you instead of at you, why your children fear you instead of love you. Stop, Clara whispered, tears threatening her carefully applied powder. While Abigail, he continued relentlessly, will have a man who'd die for her, children who adore her, and a life built on something real. She's already won. Clara, she won the day she chose love over bitterness, work over vanity, substance over show. The stagecoach driver called out, impatient to leave. Clara climbed aboard without another word, but at the window, she turned back. I hate you, she said to Abigail. I've always hated you, for being older, for being Father's favorite before I was born, for making me look shallow by comparison. I know, Abigail said sadly. I've always known. I'm sorry for whatever I did to make you feel that way. You existed, Clara said simply. That was enough. The coach pulled away, taking Clara and her bitterness toward whatever future awaited her in Denver. Tom and Martha Whelan stood watching until it disappeared. Then Martha surprised everyone by pulling Abigail into a fierce embrace. Maybe it's for the best, she murmured. Maybe away from here, she can become someone better. Maybe, Abigail agreed, though they all knew it was unlikely. Clara's poison ran too deep, fed for too long by preference and praise. That evening, the town gathered for an impromptu farewell for the unlikely couple. The church social hall filled with people who'd whispered about Abigail for 2 years but now came to wish her well. The transformation was remarkable and telling. Funny how shooting a raider changes folks' opinions, Bill from the ranch commented, raising his glass in toast, to Mrs. Carson, soon to be McKenna, who proved a widow's worth isn't measured in beauty or helplessness. Hear, hear, the crowd chorused. Mrs. Morrison, who'd been so cruel about the lemonade bowl, approached with uncharacteristic humility. I owe you an apology, she said stiffly. I let Clara's attitudes influence mine. It was wrong. It's forgotten, Abigail said graciously, though Ethan noticed her hand trembled slightly in his. The evening continued with music and dancing. Ethan, still recovering, sat watching as Abigail was passed from partner to partner. Men who'd ignored her for 2 years now, eager to dance with the woman who'd become a legend. She handled it all with quiet dignity, but her eyes kept finding his across the room, as if assuring herself he was still there. "She looks happy," Tom Whelan observed, joining Ethan on the bench. "Haven't seen her truly happy since before James died. I'll keep her that way," Ethan promised. "I believe you will." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You said something earlier about me being her father's favorite before Clara was born. You were right. William Carson doted on that girl. When he died and left me as guardian, I promised I'd take care of his daughters. Both of them. You kept your promise." "Did I?" Tom's voice was bitter. "I gave them shelter. Yes, but I let Martha spoil Clara rotten while Abigail did all the work. Let one daughter become a monster while the other became a servant. Some guardian I was." "You're making it right now," Ethan pointed out. "The wagon, the money, your public support. It matters. Too little, too late," Tom muttered. "But at least she's getting out, getting her chance." He stood abruptly. "Take care of her. McKenna. She's the best of the Carson line, whether she knows it or not," as if summoned by the conversation. Abigail appeared, flushed from dancing. "You should be resting," she scolded Ethan gently. "I'm resting," he protested. "Sitting right here, watching the prettiest woman in the room remember how to smile." She blushed deeper. "Ethan McKenna, you're a shameless flatterer." Just a man who knows what he's seeing," he corrected. "Dance with me?" "Your ribs. One dance won't kill me. And I want them all to see the cowboy who rejected the beautiful sister chose right." They moved slowly to the music, careful of his injury. Around them, the town watched and whispered. But for once the whispers seemed approving rather than cruel. "Do you think Clara will be all right?" Abigail asked quietly. "Do you care if she is? She's still my sister. Despite everything, I can't help hoping," she sighed. "It's foolish. I know. It's kind," Ethan corrected. "One of the many reasons I love you." Pastor Williams approached as the song ended. "I understand you're wanting to be married before you leave." "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing," Ethan confirmed. "It would be my honor, though I must say, when you first arrived in Dry Creek, I never imagined, well," he smiled at Abigail. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." "Mysterious indeed," she murmured. Later, as the gathering wound down, Abigail found herself surrounded by the women of the town, receiving advice about California, marriage, and starting over. Some of it was practical, some ridiculous, but all of it was kindly meant. "I have something for you," Mrs. Garrett, the banker's widow, said quietly. She pressed a small, wrapped package into Abigail's hands. "It was my mother's, for your wedding day." Abigail unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "I can accept this. You can and will." "Mrs." Garrett said firmly. "2 years ago, when my Henry died, you were the only one who came to sit with me, the only one who understood what it meant to lose a husband, to face raising children alone. You brought food when you barely had enough for yourself. This is inadequate, but it's what I have to give." Tears slipped down Abigail's cheeks as she embraced the older woman. Around them, other women nodded, remembering small kindnesses from the widow they'd all pitied and few had truly seen. "Mama!" Samuel's voice cut through the moment. He ran up, clutching something in his small hands. "Look what Mr. Tom gave me." It was a new pocket knife, child-sized but real. Tom Whelan followed more slowly, smiling at the boy's excitement. "Every young man heading west needs a good knife," he said gruffly. "Your papa can teach you to use it proper." "My papa," Samuel repeated, looking at Ethan with shining eyes. "I'm gonna have a papa again. The best papa," Ethan promised, ruffling the boy's hair. "Now, what do you say to Mr. Whelan?" "Thank you, sir," Samuel chirped, then ran off to show his treasure to the other children. The evening finally ended, and the family returned to the ranch. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, then departure for California. Abigail stood at her window in the main house, a guest room, not the servants' quarters she'd occupied for 2 years, looking out at the stars. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha Whelan entered, carrying a white dress. "It was mine," she said softly. "My wedding dress. I'd like you to wear it tomorrow, if it fits." The dress was beautiful, ivory silk with delicate lace, yellowed slightly with age but well preserved. It was finer than anything Abigail had worn since before James died. "Martha, Please," the older woman interrupted. "Let me do this one thing right. Let me send you off as the daughter I should have treated you as all along." They embraced then, 2 women who'd let circumstances and a beautiful, poisonous girl come between them for too long. When Martha left, Abigail tried on the dress. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. Outside her window, she could see the loaded wagon that would carry them west. Beyond it, the vast prairie stretched toward California and a new life. In a few hours, she'd stand before Pastor Williams and pledge herself to a man who'd seen her worth when everyone else saw only a burden. The cowboy rejected the beautiful sister and chose the widow no cowboy wanted. She whispered to her reflection, but that wasn't quite right anymore. She wasn't the widow no one wanted. She was the woman Ethan McKenna had fought raiders to protect, the woman he'd stood before the whole town to claim. Tomorrow she'd be Abigail McKenna, riding toward a future bright with possibility. Tonight, she was just a woman in love, counting the hours until her new life could begin. A coyote called somewhere in the darkness, and the wind whispered promises through the cottonwoods. Change was coming with the dawn, good change, welcome change. And Abigail Carson was finally, truly ready for it. The sun rose like a benediction on Abigail Carson's wedding day, painting the prairie in shades of gold and rose. She stood before the mirror in Martha Whelan's borrowed dress, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. Gone was the worn widow in faded black. In her place stood a bride, hope luminous in her eyes despite the years that had tried to extinguish it. "Mama, you look beautiful." Samuel burst into the room, dressed in his Sunday best, a new shirt. Tom Whelan had quietly purchased for the occasion. "Thank you, sweetheart." She knelt to straighten his collar, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you ready for our adventure?" "I've been ready forever," the boy declared. "Mister, Ethan says we might see the ocean in California. Is it really bigger than the whole prairie?" "Even bigger," she promised, though she'd never seen it herself. That was part of the magic. They were heading toward wonders none of them had witnessed, building dreams on hope rather than experience. A knock interrupted them. "Abigail?" Tom Whelan's voice was unusually gentle. "It's time." The small church was fuller than she'd expected, despite the early hour. It seemed half of Dry Creek had turned out to witness the marriage of the widow no cowboy had wanted to the cowboy who'd chosen her over beauty and wealth. Ethan waited at the altar, his injury still evident in the careful way he held himself, but his eyes bright with an emotion that made Abigail's breath catch. He wore his best clothes, simple but clean, and looked to her like everything she'd never dared hope for. Tom Whelan offered his arm. "May I?" he asked quietly. "I know I've no right, after these 2 years, but you took us in when we had nowhere else to go." Abigail interrupted. "Whatever came after, I'll always be grateful for that." He walked her down the aisle, past faces she'd known all her life. Some had been kind, others cruel, but today they all watched with something approaching respect. The woman who'd defended her home with a shotgun, who'd endured their whispers with dignity, was claiming her second chance at happiness. Pastor Williams smiled as they reached the altar. "Dearly beloved, we gather this morning to witness something remarkable, the triumph of true worth over shallow beauty, of love over convenience." "Just marry them, Pastor," someone called out good-naturedly. "Save the sermon for Sunday." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation. Even Ethan smiled, reaching for Abigail's hand. "Very well," the pastor agreed. "Ethan McKenna, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and hold, in sickness and health, in plenty and in want, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live?" I do, Ethan said firmly, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. Today and every day after. Abigail Carson, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold in sickness and health, in plenty and in want, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live? For a moment, Abigail's throat closed with emotion. She thought of James, her first love, and knew he would want this for her, this second chance, this good man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. I do, she whispered, then stronger. I do. The rings? Samuel stepped forward importantly, carrying the simple gold bands they'd purchased with part of Tom's gift. Nothing fancy, nothing that would have impressed Clara, but perfect in their plain promise. These rings represent the unbroken circle of love. Pastor Williams intoned, Ethan, place this ring on Abigail's finger and repeat after me. The words flowed over them, ancient promises made new in their mouths. When Abigail slipped the ring onto Ethan's weathered finger, she felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she hadn't experienced since James's death. By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The pastor smiled. You may kiss your bride, Mr. McKenna. The kiss was gentle, mindful of the watching crowd and Ethan's healing ribs, but in it was a promise of all the kisses to come, in California sunshine and through whatever storms they'd weather together. Ladies and gentlemen, Pastor Williams announced, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Ethan McKenna. The church erupted in applause. Samuel threw himself at them, and Ethan lifted him despite his injury, creating a circle of three that felt complete in a way Abigail hadn't dared imagine. Outside, their wagon waited, packed and ready. The wedding breakfast was simple, held in the church hall with whatever food people had brought. No fancy cake or imported delicacies like Clara would have demanded, but the meal was seasoned with genuine goodwill. Speech, someone called out. Let's hear from the groom. Ethan stood slowly, raising his glass of cider. I'm not much for speeches, he began. But I want to say this. They tell me I rejected the beautiful sister, that I chose the widow no cowboy wanted. He looked down at Abigail. They're wrong. I chose the woman every cowboy should want, one with strength enough to stand beside him, courage enough to defend what's hers, and love enough to make any place home. I chose beauty that goes deeper than skin. I chose right. More applause, and not a few tears from the women present. Even some of the men looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Too soon. It was time to leave. The wagon was brought around, Samuel already clambering into the back where his small bed was made up among their supplies. Abigail stood for a moment, looking at the town that had been her prison and her refuge. No regrets? Ethan asked softly. None, she said firmly. Only anticipation. They said their goodbyes. Martha Whelan wept openly, pressing preserves and dried goods into their hands. Tom shook Ethan's hand for a long time, words unnecessary between them. Even some who'd been unkindest came forward with small gifts or good wishes. Mrs. Morrison pressed a small sewing kit into Abigail's hands. For your new home, she said awkwardly. And I'm sorry for everything. It's already forgotten, Abigail assured her. Doc Pritchard checked Ethan's bandages one last time. You've got medical supplies in the wagon. Try not to need them. I'll have a good nurse, Ethan said, smiling at his new wife. Finally, they were ready. Ethan helped Abigail onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her, moving carefully but determined. Samuel popped his head up between them, too excited to stay in the back. Ready? Ethan asked, taking up the reins. Ready, Abigail confirmed, her hand finding his. California, here we come, Samuel shouted. Ethan clicked to the horses, and the wagon began to roll. Behind them, the population of Dry Creek stood watching. Some waved, some simply stared. In the doorway of the Whelan house, a figure in black appeared. Clara returned from the stage depot where she'd claimed illness to delay her departure. For a moment, the sisters' eyes met across the distance. Clara raised her hand slightly, whether in farewell or dismissal. Abigail couldn't tell. She raised her own hand in response, a final goodbye to the sister who'd chosen beauty over love, pride over family. Then the wagon crested the hill, and Dry Creek disappeared behind them. The prairie stretched endless before them, golden grass rippling like water in the wind. The sky was impossibly vast, bright with promise. Somewhere ahead lay California, a place none of them had seen but all had imagined. There would be challenges. Abigail knew. Hard days and harder nights, sickness and setbacks and all the trials of building a new life. But she would face them with a partner, not alone, with a man who saw her truly, loved her deeply, and had chosen her over easier paths. The widow no cowboy wanted had become the wife one cowboy treasured. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, glancing at her as he guided the horses along the rutted trail. "About Clara's last words at the church social," Abigail admitted. "She said I'd be old before my time, living in poverty with a saddle tramp. Regrets already. No?" She smiled, feeling younger than she had in years. "I was thinking she was wrong. I'm not growing older, I'm growing younger. Every mile we travel, I feel years falling away. By the time we reach California, I might be young enough to start believing in dreams again." "Believe," Ethan urged, covering her hand with his. "We've got nothing but dreams ahead of us now." "Look," Samuel pointed excitedly. "An eagle." They watched the bird soar overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. It flew west, as if showing them the way. "It's a sign," Abigail said softly. "Everything's a sign when you're happy." Ethan replied, "But I'll take it." They rolled on through the morning, 3 souls in a wagon heading toward a future written in hope rather than resignation. Behind them, their past grew smaller with each turn of the wheels. Ahead, California waited with all its golden promises. The cowboy had rejected the beautiful sister and chosen the widow no cowboy wanted. But more than that, he'd chosen love over appearance, substance over surface, a partner over an ornament. And in choosing her, he'd given Abigail back herself, helped her remember she was more than a burden, more than a servant, more than her sister's shadow. She was Abigail McKenna now, wife, mother, pioneer, a woman heading west with the man she loved, toward a life they'd build together from courage, hope, and the kind of love that sees clearly and chooses wisely. The sun climbed higher, blessing their journey. Samuel began to sing a song Abigail had taught him, his young voice bright with joy. Ethan joined in, his baritone mixing with the boy's soprano. After a moment, Abigail added her voice to theirs, and their song rose over the prairie like a prayer of thanksgiving. They were no longer the cowboy, the widow, and the fatherless child. They were a family, bound by choice rather than blood, stronger for the trials that had brought them together. And they were going home, not to a place they'd been, but to a place they'd make. The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward California and all the promises that waited there. And if anyone had been watching from Dry Creek, they would have seen something beautiful. Not the surface beauty Clara prized, but the deeper beauty of love triumphant, hope restored, and dreams reclaimed. The prairie wind whispered its blessing, and they disappeared into the vast horizon, writing their own story with every mile traveled, every song sung, every hand held. The beginning. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Ethan and Abigail's journey from prejudice to acceptance, from loneliness to love. Where are you listening to this story from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this tale. Did Ethan make the right choice? What do you think happened to Clara? I'd love to hear your perspectives on this frontier romance.